Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this latest presentation from the ever so virtual York Theatre Company. My name is Jim Morgan. I'm the ever so virtual producing artistic director, and my guest on our new series, Untitled Chapter, is the fabulous Mr. Broadway himself, Lee Roy Reams. Welcome, Lee Roy.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jim, and good to see you. Fasten your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be a bumpy night.
We have talked about doing this kind of an evening since even before the pandemic began, and it just seems like the perfect use of your talents. I don't know whether it's the best use of mine, but the wonderful thing is that you're full of stories, most of them true, and you tell them better than anyone. And there are so many people who are so excited about it. I can't wait to get into it. So why don't we?
Let's do it.
Although a few years back in Covington, Kentucky, you joined the world. Can you tell us a little bit about your growing up in Kentucky and how you ended up in New York?
Sure. I'm the youngest of 7 children. And whenever people would ask my mother how many children she had, she would say, I've got 3 boys, 3 girls, and Leroy. So that's how it started. And you know, Jim, I was blessed because whatever it is I was supposed to do, I've known what I was going to do from birth. When I was a kid, I used to get up in the middle of the floor whenever music was on, singing and dancing. And so my mother read in the paper that if you sign your child up for so many lessons at the local dance school, the Jules Stein Dance School, you would get a free pair of tap shoes and a promise that your child would be in the recital. And the sign outside said, tap toe, ballet, acrobatic, baton, ballroom, voice, personality, and culture. And so I had a young girl teacher because Jules Stein didn't teach the kids. So that's how I started out. So I got a little bit of everything. And my first dance recital, we did exactly like you and the Johnson Rag. That's when I was first on stage. And of course, I took to it like a duck to water. And at the end of that recital, the dancing teacher hung himself, which had absolutely nothing to do with me. But he passed on. And so then I went to the next dance teacher, who was a young man, Bobby Ziegler, who taught in Covington, Kentucky. He was like 18, 19 years old. And he opened his studio, and then he got drafted. So then he went away, and then his teacher, Alma Tranter, came in to take over the school. And when she saw me, she thought I was too advanced to be in my age group, so she promoted me to the older kids. And she told my mother she wanted me to do a solo dance in the recital. And my mother said, well, we don't have money to pay for the private lesson. She said, it doesn't matter. I'll do it for nothing for Leroy. She said, and she's the first one who told my mother, she said, Leroy's got it. He can make a living doing this. So you have to really get behind him and pay the money and get him trained because he can do it. And that was my first valid reason for being what I became, a song and dance man. So she gave me the first positive reaction, and I took it and ran with it. And then I studied with all of the teachers around the Cincinnati, Ohio, Covington, Kentucky area because they share the Ohio River. Covington's on the south side, Cincinnati's on the north side. And of course, that's where, Eliza and Uncle Tom's Cabin came and was transferred over to Cincinnati. So it's a very famous area. The slaves all came through that area. But anyway, that's what I did. And so in high school, I took commercial courses so that I would have a trade so I could, do something, type and take shorthand if I couldn't work as an actor. And then I was lucky that at the University of Cincinnati, they had a theater major, a theater arts major at the Arts and Sciences College. And we didn't get a lot of the musical things. So during that summer, I got a call from the Cincinnati Zoo Opera, and they needed dancers for the ballet company. And people always laugh when they say the Zoo Opera Company, the Cincinnati Zoo. There was an open air pavilion, and that's where they put on the operas. And they brought down all the people from the Met. I mean, this was a big thing. I mean, you know, Anna Moffo, all of the famous, opera singers would come there in the summer and work. And so I was in the ballet, and in the company was a young dancer named Susie Ficker. And she was about maybe 14, 15, and I was 17 going on 18 that summer. And so we became friendly, and she said, would you like to come to my school and study ballet? And I said, I'd love to, but I said, I don't have the money. You know, we barely had enough for me to go to the University of Cincinnati. And she said, well, I can get you a scholarship. I said, well, what do I have to do? She said, I'll have my teacher. She comes to the opera all the time, and I'll have her look at me. And her name was Marion LaCour. And she came backstage and offered me a scholarship. So that's when I got hooked up with the College Conservatory of Music, which was a separate school back then. It was not part of the university. They became a part of the university my junior year. And then I also studied voice at the College Conservatory of Music. So I was going to two schools at once. And of course, that young girl, Susie Ficker, became Suzanne Farrell of the New York City Ballet. She was picked up that next year by Diana Adams of New York City Ballet, who was scouting for talent. And she took Susie to New York, where she got a Ford Scholarship. And she became Suzanne Farrell, and that was the connection. So that was my training. And so then when I graduated, of course, in between, I went up to the James Alex Summer Theater in Dayton, Ohio, and did summer stock. That was between my freshman and sophomore year. And I got my equity card there. And it was part of the Kenley circuit, but Kenley didn't do it that year because the local people thought they could do it without Kenley. So James Alex did it for a couple of years. I only did it the first year, though. And I worked with a lot of the stars that summer. And that's how I got my equity card. Then I came to New York, and I was ready to go. And went to my first audition with Juliet Prowse, and that's how it all began. And many, many stories, Jim. You have to jump in what you would like me to embellish on. That summer at the James Alex Summer Theater, the first production we did was Showboat, and it starred Dorothy Dandridge as Julie.
Really?
Yeah. And all through rehearsal, she was saving her voice. So she would sing, "She got a bird's got a fly, got a loved one till I got." She was saving her voice. So come opening night, she didn't have a voice. So when she went on stage and when she sang the big number, "Can't Help Loving That Man," she said, "Fish gotta swim, birds gotta fly, I gotta love one man till I die. Can't help loving that man of mine," to the audience, meaning she couldn't sing. So that was quite an education. And I danced with Rita Moreno in Damn Yankees. She played Lola, and I did Who's Got the Pain? Well, they do the mambo. I did that number with her, and she was just terrific. And we became fast friends. I mean, I can elaborate on that. And Dorothy Collins did Brigadoon, and then I did Annie Get Your Gun, and the star was an English lady named Christine Norden. Have you ever heard of her, Christine Norden? She was from London, and she was kind of like a Diana Dors type. We had never heard of her either, but she was really funny, and she was coming in because Janice Page was the star, but she supposedly had a pressure cooker blow up in her face, and she canceled, and they got Christine Norden because she was one of the actors with a casting director in New York who was furnishing them with their stars. And Christine Norden was going to learn Annie Get Your Gun in 10 days, and she had never seen the show. So you can imagine what that was like. She was really a funny lady, and I adored her. She had big boobs. And, so when I went to the first day of rehearsal, and I introduced myself to her, and she said, "Oh, you're cute." She said, "I have to go to a costume fitting. Why don't you come with me and we'll get acquainted?" I said, "Sure, Christine." So I went to the fitting with her, and she got it. And she took off all of her clothes except for her bikini bra and her bikini panties. And she bent over, and her boob fell out of her brassiere, and she picked up, and she went, "Get back in there, my little pink poodle." And that was my introduction to summer stock. And she laughed. She laughed and she said to me, she said, honey, I hope I didn't embarrass you. I said, no, you didn't embarrass me. But I'll tell you what embarrassment is. She said, I was going down on my boyfriend in a convertible when a bus drove by. She said, now that's embarrassing. So that's my introduction to summer stock. I learned so much that summer. As many people say, you know, when they say, where did you learn to do all of that? They said, oh, I did summer stock last year. It was a big training ground for all of us. And the last show that we did was
as all of you.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. What did you say, Jim?
I started to say, as everyone can hear, this is going to be a freewheeling, no holds barred kind of evening, and we're delighted. So yeah, go ahead.
And so
then, after your first year of summer stock,
yeah,
people were talking.
As we went to, and then I did Kiss Me Kate with Patricia Morrison, which was really wonderful. But the problem is the director was Neil Kenyon, who did Dames at Sea on Broadway. And I was supposed to do a lot of the parts, but he kept not giving me some of the parts because he said I was too young. He said he's so young. He said when he takes off a shirt, he's going to look 12 years old. So I didn't get some of the things that I should have gotten that summer. But anyway, I got enough. And so anyway, the Kiss Me Kate, they thought I was a little too young to play Bill Calhoun. But they let me do all of the dancing. So it was a very strange production. The guy who was playing the part, he would sing and then I would come out and do all the dancing. So, you know, anyway, but that was it. And Patricia Morrison was just a wonderful, wonderful woman. And we remained friends.
Now, all these...
You're freezing on me, Jim.
Oh, that's what I was saying. All these people you met in summer stock, did they remain friends for the rest of your life? Dorothy Collins.
Yes. Who was very nice. And I danced with Jane Powell in Most Happy Fella. I danced with Jane Powell. But the thing was, all of those people I made friends with, and that carried over into my professional life later, which was quite wonderful. But the sad thing is the last show was Wildcat with Martha Ray. And a contralto in the company came over one day and jumped and sat on my lap. And I used to wear my dance belt backwards, and I wore myself down instead of up. I didn't know the difference. And she bruised my testicles. So I had to go to the doctor. So I missed the last show. And so that was my summer stock story. But I got my equity card. I went back to school and finished the 3 years, and then I graduated. And then I did summer stock that year down in Florida. The university took over a theater. And then I came to New York. And so anyway, you're going out now, Jim. We've lost you. I'll just keep talking for those of you who can still hear. So I got to New York, and since I had my equity card, as a matter of fact, then I stayed with my dear friend Marcia Lewis, who was my friend from college. She attended the University of Cincinnati. She was getting her nursing degree because she was already a registered nurse because she had gotten her, license through them, and she was going to get her degree. And so she was working at the Mount Sinai Hospital. So I stayed with her when I first came to New York. And then I picked up backstage and show business. And it said the Julia Prowse nightclub act. And I read, and it said you had to be 6 feet tall, which I could stretch to be 6 feet. You had to sing and dance, which I could do, and attractive. So I went to the audition. And the choreographer was Ernest Flatt, who had done the Gary Moore show and things like that. And so at that audition was Julia Prowse's manager, Mark Mordo. And as I'm auditioning, Mark Mordo kept looking at me going, and I thought, I'm going to have to put out to get my first job. But anyway, at the end of the audition, Ernie Flatt said, tomorrow some of you will be called back. And if you're called back, bring your stuff because you'll start rehearsal that day. So be prepared to stay. So I got called back. And there were only 2 of us brought back, and the other boy was taller. So I thought, well, he's going to get the job because he's taller. But they chose me. And of course, at that same audition, Mark Mordo's going. So after the audition, Mark said to Juliet, "Hey, Juliet, do you mind if I take the kid out for breakfast?" I thought, "Oh, now here we go. Now she's going to know." So I went to breakfast with Mark, and we sat down. And once we started to eat, I knew I was safe because a gay man wouldn't have eaten like that. So I was safe. So then he got into talking about the salary. And I thought, now here we go. He's going to think I don't know what I'm doing, that I'm a green kid, and this and that. But I knew that on Broadway, to be in the chorus, you were paid $125 a week. So I thought they're not going to get me for less than $125 a week. So we sat down and Mark said, "Now listen, kid, when we start out, you'll get $350 a week. And when we play Vegas, you'll be making $400 a week." So I almost fell off my stool. And that was my beginning. And Juliet was just one of the loveliest, dearest people. I fell in love with her the first time I met her, and I remained in love with her until she passed. And she was the reason for getting me started in show business. Now, that nightclub act, the writers were Fred Ebb and John Kander. Now, this was before, their big hits. And they were working on Flora the Red Menace with Liza Minnelli. And the musical director was Billy Goldenberg, who, of course, did Ball and all of those things. So that's how I started out.
Wow.
And then when the act finished, I came back to New York and I picked up the backstage show business and read the ads. And I went in to do Sweet Charity at the audition. You want to hear that whole story about?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I go into Sweet Charity and I wore ballet tights back then because I couldn't buy dance pants in Covington, Kentucky or Cincinnati. And I didn't know if they even sold them in New York. So I wore ballet tights to my audition. Well, I think that Bob Fosse thought I was a ballet dancer and wasn't paying attention to me during the audition, but Gwen was watching me. So I knew that she was probably on my side. And so they kept me, and he was reticent. And then I got into the last group, and then we had to sing. Well, I was a singer. I had studied. So when I got up to sing, Cy Coleman jumped up, ran over to Bob Fosse, and was very animated. I thought, well, that's a good sign. But Fosse still wasn't sold on me. And then he had Miguel Hedro, who was a Puerto Rican dancer, and myself read for a small part in the show called Young Spanish Man. And I think he thought, well, I'll get rid of this guy now because he, but he didn't realize I had Spanish 101 at the University of Cincinnati. So I said, "Señorita, señorita, she's drowning in the lake," because I could do my rrrr. And of course, Miguel didn't speak very well. So anyway, I got in the show. And Fosse wasn't really fond of me, I could tell. And then when we did the Frug, and we were all supposed to carry lit cigarettes, and I said, well, I don't smoke. And I said, I hope you forgive me, but if you want to let me go, I'm not going to learn how to smoke. So I'm not going to smoke. And he said, well, I guess you can carry an unlit cigarette. You'll be the only one, but that's okay. So then we got out of town in Philadelphia, and we had our first performance. And this is a true story. Fosse came back at intermission. I ran into the boys' dressing room, and he said, "What were you doing out there on the stage tonight?" And I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to be fired. He doesn't like me anyway. And I said, "I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean." He said, "I mean, dance and look like that." He said, "You never did that in rehearsal." He said, "I couldn't keep my eyes off of you tonight." So then I became a favorite. And that's how it happened. And, and then when we got back to New York, Juliet asked me to go back with her act. And of course I did, because to be honest with you, I didn't want to dance in the chorus. And in Juliet's act, at least there were only 4 guys. And I got more attention. And also, I was madly in love with Juliet. And so I handed him my notice. Now, Bob Fosse again came back during the intermission during that first week and said, "I understand you handed in your notice." He said, "Do you know how many dancers in New York want to work with me? And now we're going to have to go back into rehearsal to replace you. I want you to give me one good damn reason why you're leaving this show." And I said, "Juliet Prowse pays me 3 times what you do." And he laughed and he said, "Well, I can't argue with that." And that was it. Now, thank God he asked me to do the film. And then I danced with Gwen and Buddy Vest on a special, the Cool Hand Luke number, which everyone can see on YouTube. If you look at that Gwen Verdon, Cool Hand Luke, of those 2 male dancers, we've all got our mustaches. You can't tell one of us from the other, but I think I'm the one on Gwen's left. And it was a very famous number, and one of the highlights of my life working with Gwen and Bob and Buddy in a rehearsal for a week with no one else. It was just a glorious time in my life. I'm blessed to have had that. And
I bet. Now we happen to have a few clips from you to break up the chat, I guess, from our recent cabaret series that you were a part of. We have you doing a song from Sweet Charity. Can we hear that now?
Well, we're going to try.
We're going to try. We'll pray very hard. If we think lovely thoughts.
Well, we'll talk until it comes on, Jim.
Well, yeah, when it starts, we'll stop talking.
There we go.
Here we go. Here we go. No sound.
It's my impression of Lillian Gish.
Yes, yes, and it's very accurate.
No sound.
Let's stop and move on. We'll return when the sound can return. Sorry, we're having.
That was my debut with my real hair. And now you're frozen, Jim.
Tell about dark-haired. Still, am I?
Yeah, you're freezing.
Yeah.
You're freezing. I can hear myself, so you know. But you're going in and out of freezing.
I can hear myself.
Yeah. Talk, Jim.
Let me go see if.
No, you're still going in and out.
Just since they can hear you, just keep talking. I will check the router.
Well, just put a number on my back and pretend that I'm June Havoc in a marathon, or I'm on the Jerry Lewis marathon. I'll just keep talking.
That's it.
But doing the film of Sweet Charity was, again, one of the highlights of my life. And my first day at Universal, I was brought in and I was to have a costume fitting with Edith Head. And she came to pick me up in a little golf cart that she drove that had fringe around the top. And we went into her studio and she showed me a sketch of me in the Frug. And I asked her if we could have velvet spats on our shoes and we could have a lace sulfide bow tie that drooped rather than a regular bow tie to make us a little different. And she changed it. She was quite wonderful. And I asked her to sign the sketch for me and she gave it to me. So I have an Edith Head sketch now hanging on my wall, which was really terrific. And then I remained in California during that whole time, dancing on all of the variety shows, like the Danny Kaye show, which was my first TV show that I danced on as a regular. And that was due to Tony Sharmley, who's one of my very favorite choreographers, who always featured me, and I love Tony. He just passed this past year. And he was really brilliant. I think probably the best television choreographer because he really used the camera. So I did the Danny Kaye show. I did the Red Skelton show. I did the Dean Martin show. I did a lot of specials. And then the last show I did, because Ernie Flatt was coming back, was the Carol Burnett show. So I was on the first 3 months of that, but I wasn't happy because I wasn't getting the exposure I wanted. And I felt that I was on a treadmill doing the same thing. So one of the shows we were going to do The Jungle Book, and Carol was going to play Mowgli, and Ernie Flatt asked me if I wanted to be the front end or the back end of the elephant, and I said neither one, and I don't want to do this anymore. So I talked to Ernie at the end of the day, and I said, Ernie, I'll finish out the week, but I don't want to do this anymore, and I've got to get back to New York. And so I handed in my notice, and at that time I got a call from Mitzi Gaynor, her husband, Jack Bean, and he wanted me to do Mitzi's nightclub act. And I said, no, I'm going back to New York. And he said, no, you've got to do this for us. He said, because Mitzi really wants you. And he said, I'll make a deal with you. If you just open us in Lake Tahoe, then you can go and we'll get another guy to replace you. But we need you during the rehearsal period. And then he gave me the salary, and it was less than what Juliet paid. And I said, well, thank you very much, but I get paid this by Juliet, and I expect to get that. So he said, well, we'll give it to you, but don't tell the other dancers. So I opened the act in Lake Tahoe, and I love Mitzi Gaynor. And then I left, and I came back, and I was going to stop in Covington and Cincinnati to see my family. And the university had leased a showboat from Indiana University, and it was called the Showboat Majestic. And we were going to run it for the summer. So Paul Rutledge, who was my mentor at UC, who was head of the theater department, told me that if I would direct, choreograph, and play the leads, that they would give me credit toward my master's degree in theater. So I decided to stay and do that. And that's when I met Pam Myers, who, had one more year left. And that's where Pam and I became buddies. And so after I finished that summer, I came to New York. And then I immediately went on the Ed Sullivan Show for Peter Gennaro, because I like to work, Jim. I like to work. So I was still doing the same thing. At least I was back in New York. So then I started auditioning for things, and I auditioned for Oklahoma at Lincoln Center to play Will Parker. And so would you like to hear that audition story with Richard Rodgers?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So I go into audition for Richard Rodgers, and I was told, don't sing a Richard Rodgers song because he's very particular. If you don't sing it musically correct or you go up in the lyrics, he gets very upset. So thinking I was so smart, I would show him that I could really sing. So I decided to sing Leonard Bernstein's Lonely Town. And I got out about 2 lines, and he screamed. He said, I don't want to hear you sing that song. You're auditioning for a comedy character. Don't you have a comedy song to sing? And I said, oh, no, sir, I didn't bring one, but I can sing Kansas City. I know. He said, well, why wouldn't you sing that? Just sing it in the show. And I said, well, I'd love to sing it for you, Mr. Rodgers. So I sang 2 choruses of Kansas City. And then he said, young man, can you dance? I said, yes, sir. He said, show me. So I had a dance routine. And so I did my dance routine. And then he said, young man. And I said, yes, sir. He said, is there anything you can't do? I said, no, sir, there isn't. And I got the job. I didn't read the script. I got the job. And that was Will Parker. And that was the summer at the Lincoln Center at the New York State Theater. And the wonderful Aunt Eller was Margaret Hamilton, who was just divine. Wow. And we became really close. And she used to invite me down to her lovely apartment on Gramercy Park. And she would make tea, and she would call them toasted cheese sandwiches. We call them grilled cheese, but she called them toasted cheese sandwiches. So I used to sit in her apartment, and I just literally loved her too. I was very blessed with the people I worked with. Well, then after Oklahoma closed, then I went back dancing on the Ed Sullivan Show for Peter Gennaro. And one of those numbers is Oh Sweet Blindness with Liza Minnelli, which you can see on YouTube if you look it up. And you'll see me. Yes. There's only 2 boys dancing behind her. One is black, that's Paul Reed Roman, and I'm the white guy. And so I did numbers like that. And then I got the audition for Applause. And I was told by my agent, because they knew he was a homosexual hairdresser. And my agent was rather surprised. He said, I don't know whether you should do that, Lee Roy, because you might get typecast. But I didn't think about that at all. Farthest thing from my mind, all I could think about was it's a part on Broadway, and Lauren Bacall is the star, and Ron Field is the director choreographer. And I have a
Comden and Green were the writers.
Yes.
Strauss and Adams.
Charles and
all
Adams.
Of that.
Yes.
Yeah. So, it was a new musical.
Yeah, I went in. I wanted to do it, but it's interesting because I have a story to tell on Ron Field, which goes back to my days as a chorus dancer in L.A. Ron was coming in to do a TV special, and 3 of us were called in to audition for Ron. And at that audition, I wore a pair of blue stretch dance pants, which by then I was wearing dance pants. And I had a red and white striped shirt, and I had a little blue scarf tied around my neck because we wore scarves in those days. This is, the mid 60s. And so at the audition, there were 3 of the dancers that were brought in, and I knew the other 2 guys. And I'm not bragging when I tell you this, Jim, but I was the better dancer, and I knew that. But Ron Field just ignored me, and I didn't get the job. And so then later in the season, I danced with Sid Charisse for Tony Sharmely on her first television special. And Tony had a party at his house, and I was invited, and Ron Field was there. And Ron Field came up to me and he said, "I owe you an apology." And I said, "Yes." He said, "When you came to my audition, I didn't really know who you were." He said, "Because all I could see was that red, white, and blue outfit you had on. You looked like a fucking American flag." And I said, "Well, God forbid I could have danced." So I thought, to hell with you. I can work for other people. You're not the only choreographer in the business. So anyway, now you go back to applause. So I'm thinking, well, Ron Field, maybe he'll like me. But then I was told by my agent that they liked me and that there was a very good chance they were going to offer me the part. So I was very excited. And then my agent called and said, "Well, they didn't offer you the part. They chose someone else." And I was very depressed. And then Juliet called me to go back to do her act for a 3rd time. And I got as far as Covington because it was Thanksgiving time. I wanted to be with my family. And I got a call from Mark Mordo, her manager, said, "Juliet, I want you to come out now. She wants to start rehearsal earlier." And I didn't want to leave. I was there for Thanksgiving. And then I was like Morris Scherer, Vicky in the red shoes. It's like my feet just stopped. And I was like going backwards. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. And I called Juliet and I said, "Juliet, please forgive me. I would love to be in your company again, but I can't go and do what I've been doing. I've got to go back to New York." So I went back to New York. And of course, I was dancing on the Ed Sullivan Show again because I like to work and I like having a paycheck. And it was New Year's Eve. And I was very depressed. And by that time, I was living with my future husband, Robert Donahoe, in my apartment up on 93rd in Amsterdam. It was a great apartment, though. And I was very depressed. And Bob got a bottle of champagne for us that night. And we made a toast. I said, I should have had that part in applause. And went to bed. And the next morning, the phone rang. And they called my agent. And they had fired the guy playing the part and wanted me to come into rehearsal. And wow. So I didn't go into rehearsal without a signed contract. And they were offering me less money than I should have been making. And so Bob is writing on a pad, "Take the job, take the job, take the job." And I said, "Why should I take the job?" And I got the phone. I said, "If I don't want to do it for the money." He said, "No, take a less time. Have them give you a shorter contract. Make it 6 months starting from the first day of rehearsal." So that was my stipulation, and I got it. So, of course, then the show was a hit. And then Larry Cash, of course, wanted to sign me to a contract, and that's how I got my pay increase. So, I learned quickly. But the thing about, to get into Lauren Bacall, Jim, I was brought in, and the show was almost in run-through. They were doing like run-throughs. And here I didn't know anything, and they threw a script at me when they brought me in, and they were going to walk me quickly through the show. And the first scene, of course, is in her dressing room after the Tony Awards scene. Then it's her dressing room, and it's opening night. And Ron said, "Now you come into the scene, and then you go over and you stand by the closet." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, since they don't know who I am, is it okay if I carry a fall and I'm brushing it?" And I said, "Then they'll know that, and then I'll put it on." And I said, "And then if you don't mind, Miss Bacall, I'll fluff your hair. I won't touch it, but I'll pretend." She said, "My friends call me Betty." And I said, "Betty?" And she said, "That's better." So then I went over and I stood at the closet. And then they got into the scene, which went on forever and ever. And finally, I raised my hand. I said, "Excuse me, when does this character get out of the closet?" Well, Betty laughed. She threw that hair back. She laughed. And I'm telling you, that cemented us from that very day. I can explain it to you. It's just that we became the characters off stage as the characters on stage. We started eating together, and we went out of town. I went out with her. And when we came back into town, and of course, I was part of the beard of the romance she was having with Len Cariou. So I was all part of that. And we get back into New York, and Len had told her that when he got back to New York, he was going back with his girlfriend, and she understood that, and he explained that to her before they got involved. I mean, this is all history. I'm not telling any tales out of school. And but when they got back to New York, although Betty loved him and they were still friends, the romance was over, and he resumed his life with his then girlfriend. And so Betty, after the show, in those days, the Palace Theater, the stage door wasn't on 47th. It was on the other side through an L-shaped alley. And the people would be back there, and Betty would leave, and she would always sign autographs. She would just tell them, if any of you start pushing or you get aggressive, I leave, but I'll sign your autographs. And of course, when she spoke, they all did what she told them to do. And so I told her, I said, Betty, this is very dangerous that you should be out here having to walk this alley every night by yourself. Someone should take you to your limo. She said, well, who's going to do it? The stage manager's not going to do it. He's out of here as soon as the curtain hits, and the doorman's not going to do it unless I tip him every night. I said, well, I'll take you out to your car. And she said, you would do that? I said, of course I'll do it. So every night I would come down to her dressing room, and we would sit, and then I would walk her to her car. And of course, she would drop me off. So, I got limousine service too. But then we started this little tradition. So then I would go down to the dressing room, because I was usually before she was, and I would make her a drink and sit it on her table. And then I got to meet all of these stars. And so Betty said to me, she said, I had a tradition back then that when I would get my show poster, if your name was on the poster, you signed it. And so I had everybody's name on the applause poster except Betty Comden. And she was coming to a matinee. So I told Bacall, I said, look, she's not going to come up to see me, but she'll see you. May I leave my poster here in your dressing room? Will you have Betty sign it for me? She said, yeah, leave it here. So after the matinee, I come down, knock on the door, and I go in. I said, did Betty sign? She said, yeah, she did. I said, oh, by the way, Leroy, this is Ingrid Bergman. So I said, well, Miss Bergman, how nice to meet you. And Betty said, why don't you have Ingrid sign your poster? And of course, I'm thinking, why should she sign it? She's not in the show. But anyway, I said, oh, Miss Bergman, would you please? She signed the poster, and Betty said, leave the poster here, and everybody that you meet will have them sign your poster. So I have a poster from Applause, Jim, that has Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Noel Coward, once. Everybody in show business is on that poster. And I've got it hanging on my wall. And that was Betty. That was Betty. See, that was our friendship. And then many times I would be asked to join her, to go out with the people. But we always had an understanding that if I thought she was going to be taken care of, I would excuse myself and leave. But many times I was asked to join them. And I had special evenings with like Jack Benny and Truman Capote and all of these people. I mean, it was really, I had an entree into the world. And I know that with the people I met, Bob Hope, Jack Benny, and George Burns, I asked them all the same question, because as men, they were very youthful and interested in everything. And I asked them, I said, what is the secret? And all three of them said the same thing. I love my work. It's not for the money, it's the work. And that's really, I understand that better than anybody. So that was, many moments. Like, I mean, I could spend an entire evening just talking about my experiences with Lauren Bacall. But then, I mean,
let me ask one thing. Yeah. Your character in that, I forget his name, but it was the first openly gay character in a Broadway musical, correct?
Dwayne Fox.
Dwayne, that's right. That's right.
What was interesting is that Ron, it was very important to Ron and also to me that the character not be stereotypical and not be a limp-wristed caricature. We wanted him to be a real person. So that was my image to do. I just played him as a real person with a little bit of a flair, but really, and I think that's why it works so well in the show, especially with Lauren Bacall. So, but and then through Betty, I left my agent and went with her agent, Peter Witt, who was Betty's agent, because she felt I didn't have a good enough agent. So I went with Peter Witt. And then when Betty was going, I did the tour with Betty. And of course, Ann Baxter came in. That's a good story there. If you want to talk about Ann Baxter, who was just terrific.
Well, as long as we get to everything else and everyone else, I'd love to hear about Ann Baxter.
Well, first of all, it was not to be an Ann Baxter. It was supposed to have been Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was brought into the Palace Theater and to audition. And she was staying at the Plaza Hotel. They had put her up there, and she was there for a week. And they were going to rehearse with her, and then she was going to audition. And she had an out if she felt she didn't want to do it, and they had an out if they felt she couldn't do it. So then all the stories kept coming back about Rita Hayworth and rehearsal. And Eddie Nolfi, who was a dance captain, and was working with her, and the story started coming back. Like in rehearsal, there was a line where she said, Dwayne, how would you like to take two lonely ladies out on the town tonight? And she said, Dwayne, how would you like to take two lonely truck drivers out on the town tonight? And they would say, no, Rita, it's two lonely ladies, not truck drivers. So, oh, well, he's gay and I had truck drivers. So then they realized that she was not comprehending what she was doing. So they thought that she was probably alcoholic. So they were getting worried that she probably couldn't do it. And of course, I was dying to work with her. And I said, please let me go over and meet her and work with her. You don't have to pay me. I'll never tell Actors Equity. I just want to be in Rita Hayworth's presence. Well, that never happened. And she auditioned. And Joe Kipnis, who was one of our producers, said, I'll tell you something. That Rita Hayworth, a week at the Plaza Hotel, don't ask about the bills. Don't ask about the bills. She auditioned. My 10-year-old daughter seen the show twice. My daughter knew more lines than Rita Hayworth at the Plaza for a week. And of course, she was out. And then I did get an autographed picture.
Oh, good.
But then luckily for them, they got Ann Baxter. And then when I was
Ann Baxter story. Ann Baxter story.
The first day I was brought in to rehearse with Ann Baxter. When I walked in, and she was like a deer caught in the headlights. Her eyes were this big around. And we were going to do the dance scene in the gay bar. And she was having trouble. And Eddie Nolfi, who was the dance captain, was like a little Hitler. He would say, now, on the 8th count of the 7th bar, and 7, 2, 3, step to the right. And I could see it was just too much for her to comprehend. And I whispered in her, I said, honey, all it is walk, 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 touch. Then go back the other way. Walk, 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 touch. She said, is that what he's trying to tell me to do? I said, yes. She said, and you will not leave my side from this moment on. And we became that same way in that part. And we became very close, and we would spend time talking. And she told me all about her book, Intermission, which everyone should run out and get a copy. Go on Amazon and get a copy. It's about her life in Australia with her second husband, where she bore him 2 children. It's a fabulous book. And we would talk about her antiques, and she said how she brought her Chinese screens and her Oriental rugs to Australia because she had to have something of art around her. We had great conversations, and anyway, and the reason she left him was, it was the structure of men and women in Australia. She couldn't be treated as a second-class citizen. That's what broke up the marriage. But anyway, she remarried again later, and she married an elderly man and moved to Connecticut. And when he died, and then she eventually died, and I'd seen her like a couple of days before she had her aneurysm. We, by accident, we were having lunch at the World Trade Center. If you can believe that, on top.
Oh, wow.
And we, sat and chatted for a while. But anyway, she was very, very happy. And she died, and I didn't know because Bob and I had a house in Danbury, Connecticut. And so she was up farther in Litchfield, I think. And so we were driving there by accident one day, and there had been an auction, an Ann Baxter auction. I was very upset because I didn't know, because I would have gone. And we went into the auction house, and at the auction, the guy said, we have an item here that was in a former auction that got lost, that we have today. It's a Oriental rug from Ann Baxter's estate. And I bought it because it's like somebody poured ice water down my back. I thought Ann wanted me to have something, and that was it. And I got that Oriental rug, and it's right over there. So, you know, that's
how wonderful.
Great lady. But anyway,
how wonderful.
Let me finish the applause thing. So with
okay.
Paul, I've been offered to go to London. And our then agent, Peter Witt, said, I don't want you to do it. He said, you're going to have a wonderful time and Betty will introduce you to everybody. But he said, the pay isn't going to be that big. And he said, it's not really going to do you any good because you can't work over there because of the labor laws that they have. So he said, and I think you should change your image. You've played a homosexual now. You've got to go back and do something else. And you've got to do it soon so you don't get typecast. So I auditioned for Lorelei with Carol Channing, and I got it. So I didn't go to London with Betty. She was not happy about that. But I stayed and I did Lorelei, and that began my friendship with Carol Channing and then my eventual friendship with Jerry Herman. So, yeah.
Well, so Dolly was later.
Yeah. Lorelei came first. We went on tour for a year, and we went.
Tell everyone who doesn't know what Lorelei was.
Lorelei was a musical comedy based on Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
Sort of an updating, bringing it up to the present. And so that Carol Channing could play the lead at a slightly older.
Right. The show started out with a funeral, and then she's there at the funeral for Mr. Esmond, her husband, and she sang the song. It's nice looking back on the past when you were past full of memories that last, sweet souvenirs of a time that was past, but now it's gone. And then after that, they do like strobe lights, and we all dance on, and we go back and do most of what was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. So it was just kind of a rehash. And we were on tour for a year, and of course the person playing my mother was Dodie Goodman, who was, again, we locked friendships and became joined at the hip. And that's, of course, where I had worked with Brandon Maggart and Applause, and Brandon was in the show. So I was surrounded by friends, and Peter Palmer was terrific, and Tamara Long was great. We had a wonderful time, but, there were problems. We got wonderful reviews in Oklahoma City because of Anita Cravens, who was the promoter there, owned the city, so we got great reviews. And then we went to Dallas next, and the reviews weren't so good. And Joe Layton had gone away on a vacation and didn't want them to find him, and they said he deserted the show, and they fired him. And then Condon and Green became the directors, and they brought in Ernie Flatt to choreograph. And then they were changed over, and they brought in Robert Tucker to choreograph more, and then they eventually brought in Robert Moore and Peter Gennaro. So we went through a lot of, and of course, when we were in California and LA, getting ready to come back to Boston, then open in New York. And of course, we came into rehearsal every day. And we got extra money because they went over the limit of rehearsal. So we got an extra paycheck, which was fine with us. So we came in every morning and rehearsed. And we come in when we were in California, and we came in with our donuts and coffee, sat down waiting for Carol to arrive. And Dodie Goodman looked at me one day and said, I know what's wrong with this show. I know what's wrong with this show. And I said, well, what's wrong with it, Dodie? She said, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. They take all this shit and they pile it up over here, and then the next day they pile it up over there, and then they spread it out again, and it's just all shit. It's just all shit. And she said, and if Carol Channing didn't want any of us in this show, and she wanted to do a nightclub back, why did she hire us? So anyway, then we went back to New York.
Now, hold on. The cast, the members of the cast, were you feeling just horrible thoughts about the future of the show?
No, because the songs were good and the added songs were working fine. And Carol is a great performer. Of course, she likes to be on stage all the time. The only reason none of my stuff was taken out of the show was she had to change clothes now and then. And so that's why, Tamara and I were there to do the things in between the changing of the clothes. And when we opened, and we got mixed reviews. We didn't get terrible reviews. And so that summer, Carol's husband felt that probably we were not going to run past the summer. So he went ahead and booked Carol for the fall. And oddly enough, after the summer, business picked up in the fall. So the producer, Goober Gross, didn't want to close the show. And Charles said, well, I've got to close it because I made commitment. I mean, we've got to close it because I made commitments. So can we do a tour for you next summer? And I will make sure Carol's, we'll get, and we had already paid off the show by doing the tour. So that's what they agreed to do. So we closed the show, not because of lack of business. It wasn't doing standing room only, but it was still doing good business. And that's the reason that it was. And that's the reason they closed the show. So then 2 years later, I get a call from Carol, and I love to do the imitation. Hello, Leroy, it's Carol. Carol Channing, as if I didn't know, right? And she said, I'm going to do a revival of Hello, Dolly, Darling, and I want you to play Cornelius Hackle, but Jerry Herman and Lucia Victor, the director, don't know you, darling, but it doesn't matter. You got the job. And of course I did. And that led to Cornelius Hackle. Again, we went on tour for a year, and then we came back and opened in New York. And that was my connection with Carol. And of course, that began my friendship with Jerry Herman.
Well, now, working on Lorelei, you didn't know Carol at all. And was it at all difficult with her at the beginning? I knew she could be
the very first day of rehearsal, I don't know why I knew this. I wore a sport coat and a tie. And so I came into rehearsal. And of course, the first day of rehearsal was nothing but PR. They had lights set up. Carol had on her white shirt with a tie, and she was all dressed up to do PR. And we were all being interviewed and things like that. Now, back in Covington, Kentucky, at our junior senior prom, we went up to Beverly Hills, and the entertainer was Carol Channing. And she sang Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, and she threw out these rhinestone bracelets, which on the clasp had her name written. And I caught 2 of them that night. So when I came into rehearsal, I took them up to Karen. I said, Miss Channing, I caught this at the Beverly Hills Country Club. And she would, oh, come here. And she, now let's take a picture. And so we had a picture which they used in publicity on tour with a bracelet. And that began my connection. And then the day that we were leaving, I had a seal fur coat and Carol had on her white mink. And Charles said, get Leroy over here in that fur coat. Have him helping Carol on the bus. Well, Carol didn't go in a bus to the airport. We did, but she rode in a limo. But we're pretending with me helping her on the bus in our fur coats. So they kind of latched on to me. And then when we got to Chicago, Peter Palmer was very upset because he wasn't getting any press. So he hired a publicity agent in Chicago. And one of the articles was put in the paper how tough it is for him being a leading man with Carol Channing. And Charles Lowe, her husband, got very upset and said, Peter Palmer is not Carol Channing's leading man anymore. It's Lee Roy Reams. He will accompany Carol on the press junkets. So I was in that act. So I went out with them. And of course, I mean, I'm just telling the truth now. What Carol would do, the critic that was going to see the show next, they would have him come into the town, and then Carol would go out to dinner with him. And it usually was a man. And then we would go into our act at the dinner. And of course, Carol, Charles, her husband, was brilliant. He kept a file on everything that she did. Like, I'll give you an example. He said, now, Carol, this critic they're going out with tonight, he's the one that likes this kind of apple. So you give him that. Carol said, how do you remember that? I said, well, he had everything written down. So he would press we go out to dinner with this critic. And of course, Carol would say, oh, and I know how much you love this apple. And he'd go, oh my God, I can't, you remember. Well, she softened them up for the reviews. And of course, to be perfectly honest too, the reason I was brought along was eye candy, because not all, but some of the critics were gay. So I was brought along to smile and be pretty, and I was all part of the act. And I learned so much, Jim, I'm telling you. I got an education, and I would sit with Carol and rehearse her with her lines, that Charles would give her. So, when we'd go on these press junkets, and I was there for support. And of course, that carried over into Hello, Dolly. And wait a minute.
You mean lines for the press outings?
Yeah.
Specifically for a city or a reviewer or something.
And then when she would do her special events, she would have to talk about the event, and she would memorize lines, and I would sit with her and talk with her, and people would think we were talking, but we were going over her lines that she was going to recite, you know.
Well, now, I should take a minute and tell everyone about a special event that's coming up this Sunday night at 7 o'clock. Can we see the slide? Here it is. Everybody's friend Richard Skipper celebrates 100 years of carol chanting, and it's a benefit for us at the York Theater Company. We're very excited. 8 p.m. this Sunday night, and it's streaming live through Richard Skipper Celebrates on Facebook and YouTube. And we hope you'll avail yourselves of that. Leroy, you're on it, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And Ricky Kane Larimer, another friend of ours, another wonderful longtime friend of ours. It's a very exciting evening.
And Christine Petty.
And Christine Petty, the fabulous Christine Petty, who's done a lot with us.
We'll be doing dueling dollies, you know. Christine and I can do
dollies. Now, does Ricky do a carol imitation?
I don't know.
We'll find out, I guess. Well, so now we're coming up to Hello, Dolly.
Mm-hmm. And
so she called you up and said you're doing it, whether they know you or not.
Yeah. And then, of course, then after Hello, Dolly, of course, you know, the next thing became 42nd Street. And, you know, all the stories of 42nd Street, which, you know, I can spend an entire hour talking about it. It depends on what you want to get into, Jim.
Well, I know you have lots of David Merrick stories.
Yes.
Can you tell one or two?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because to get through the audition story for 42nd Street, because it's a goodie. When I was doing Hello, Dolly with Carol, of course, Mike Stewart, who was the book writer, we became friends, and Mike told me he was writing a musical based on 42nd Street. Of course, I knew the movie, Ruby Keeler, Dick Powell, I knew it. And I said, well, you know, Mike, I'm very right to play, you know, the Dick Powell part. So I didn't hear from him for a couple of years. And then I got a call. They had an audition for 42nd Street. And my then agent said that, you know, you have an audition for 42nd Street. I said, great. And I said, what part is it? And they said, it's the part of Andy Lee. And I said, well, is that the Dick Powell part? He said, no, that's Billy Lawler, but they think you're too old for that. They want someone younger. So I wasn't going to go to the audition. And Bob, again, is writing on the tablet, take the audition, underlining it. So why should I take the audition? I don't want to play that part because he's like 40 years old and he's a choreographer. And he doesn't really have a number in the show. And Bob said, just go to the audition and do what you do. So a light went off on my head and I got my accompanist and I said, okay, I'm going to go out. And in those days we auditioned in theaters, which was a big plus. I'm telling you, a big plus. When you walk out on a Broadway stage and you audition, you give an entirely different thing than you do in a small room, you know, where people are 6 feet away from you. And so I told my accompanist that we're going to do the up tune. Don't wait for them to ask for a ballad. Go right into the ballad. And the ballad was I Only Have Eyes for You. And I looked into the balcony as if I was singing to Ruby Keeler. And then Tony Kaye, who was a brilliant dancer and a wonderful human being. I loved her to death. She was in town. We had just done a Rodgers and Hart review with John Gavin, Connie Towers, and Tony Tanner and Beth Fowler. And we did a big tap dance in it that I choreographed. So Tony was in town. I said, Tony, after the ballad, you come out on stage and we're going to do this big tap dance. So that's what I did at the audition. I did all 3 numbers in a row, not waiting for them to ask. And then there was like dead silence. And coming down the aisle was Gower Champion. And he got to the orchestra and he motioned me forward. And I leaned over and I said, yes, sir. He said, you're not right for Andy Lee. I said, yes, I know that. And he said, you're very right for Billy Lawler. I said, yes, I am. And that's how I got the part.
Wow.
And then what's interesting, though, is that I was called back again And I thought, oh, now here we go, because now he's going to be auditioning everybody in town. And, it's like the famous story of Mac and Mabel called Mac and Maybe, of all the people, but I wasn't afraid. I went back, and Gower said at the audition, back a second time, I said, now, I want you to do everything that you did before. Of course, Tony wasn't there, so I danced by myself. He said, because I'm getting ready to pick Peggy Sawyer, and I want to look at you again. So that was a good sign. So I auditioned again. And then I got another call. Would I come in to rehearse with the girl that he had chosen, that he wanted to try her out? And so the two dance assistants, Karen Baker and Randy Skinner, and myself, we went in to work with the girl, and the girl was Lisa Brown. We finished the audition with her, and she left. And Gower said, well, what do you think? And I said, I adore her. I think she's very right for the part. And Karen said, well, she's not a great tap dancer. And I said, well, I think she is. I said, I think she can learn it. I said, she was under a lot of pressure today, but I said, she's right for the character. And, she can learn the tapping. Well, she got the part. And so Lisa handed in her notice to Best Little Whorehouse, where she was working. And she was also playing Nola on The Guiding Light on television. So she handed in her notice there. And that weekend, she was coming in on Monday to sign her contract. And they had an open call for dancers, and at that call was Wanda Richard. And Gower looked at her and said, she's a very good tap dancer. And Karen said, yes, she is. And she said, she sent you a video of her doing Cassie and Chorus Line. You didn't look at it. And he said, well, let's keep her, and maybe she could be an understudy. He read her, changed his mind. And when Lisa Brown was coming down, she had no legal recourse, by the way. She didn't get the part, and Wanda Richard did. And that's how that all happened. But then the good point is when Wanda Richard left the show, David Merrick gave Lisa Brown the part. So Lisa got to do it on Broadway. And the only reason Lisa left the show, she was pregnant. And she had her, was pregnant with her son. And she danced almost into her 6th month. I mean, they kept letting her costumes out. And when I would put my hand on her stomach, sometimes I could feel the baby kick. So she was quite something. But that was 42nd. And of course, the opening night where Gower died and all of that. And I, again, formed a very close friendship with Gower. And, we were talking, and I mean, stories for days. And for some of the audiences, maybe they've heard these stories before, but pretend it's a rerun. And Gower told me one day during rehearsal, he said, I had this anemic blood condition, and I have to go in and get a transfusion now and then. And he said, so we thought, well, he looked so terrific and he had so much energy and everything. We didn't think anything about it. And then one day we had a private conversation. I said, Gower, I'm a song and dance man, and I'm old fashioned, and I wanted to be part of MGM. And I said, but I was born too late. And he said, I know. He said, I came in at the end of that. And he said, I'll make that a present to you with this show. And he said, Lee Roy, he said, during the 70s, he said, no one seemed to, I did the drugs. I went to the clubs. I tried to get with it. I did Rockabye Hamlet. And he said, I wasn't having success. And when David offered me 42nd Street, he said, even though we've had a checkered past, and my doctors told me I shouldn't be under the stress, he said, I had to do the show, Leroy, because I don't want to be remembered as a has-been. And that's what I remember the night that the curtain hit the stage after David Merrick made the speech about Gower dying. And I know that probably a week before that, we weren't really doing previews because David didn't want anyone to see the show. We were doing full run-throughs with no one in the house but David Merrick. And Gower was backstage after the first performance where we had an invited audience. I mean, it was like a third of the people in the orchestra. They were all invited. We all got like one ticket. And afterward, Gower was in Wanda's dressing room, and I passed by. We didn't know he was there, so I went in, and and so Gower, I'm so happy you were here, and you got the reaction from the audience. You've got a hit. And Wanda said, yes, Gower, it's all because of you. And he grabbed me, and he grabbed her, and he squeezed us so tight. And he said, no, it's because of us. And I cried. And wow. I didn't even say goodbye. I just gave him a hug, and I left the dressing room. That's the last time I saw him. And he
wow.
And then at the party, I mean, we all had this party, and of course it was a great party because we only had one producer, and we had a sit-down dinner with name cards at the Waldorf, Astoria. And can you imagine that? A sit-down dinner. There was only one producer, and there was food left for us. So it was really, we had a band. It was really great. So, of course, it's opening night. So we all go to the party, sort of like, and we were all in shock after what had happened because none of us knew that Gower had died. None of us knew. We heard it as everyone else did. And David Merrick was so smart to do that because he turned the show into a newsworthy event. So the reviews were just all incredible. And it made the show a humongous mega hit. But when I'm going into the ballroom, the first person I see is Bob Fosse, who comes up to me and said, "That son of a bitch." He said, "I filmed my own death and all that jazz, and he had to still do me one better by doing it on opening night." So we laughed, and I said, "Well, if Gower's looking down, Bob, he's getting a big kick out of you saying that tonight." So that was, the Gower champion thing. But Gower and I had we were of the same mind. And I know that had he lived and done another show, I would have either been in it or I would have been one of his assistants because we were on the same track all the time.
Well, now you have choreographed and directed in subsequent years. Was there just a point where it felt like you had to do that? It had to come out of you?
I did a lot of directing and choreographing when I was in school. And my mentor, as I mentioned earlier, Paul Rutledge, thought that's what I was going to make my fame and fortune doing was directing and choreographing because he felt that's the talent that I had. But I like the spotlight too much, Jim. And I could do it, and I can still do it. But during the period when I directed Carol's last revival of Hello, Dolly, that was 94.
Right.
And I was also appearing as Lumiere in Beauty and the Beast. So I had that going on. And and then I had directed productions of Dolly with Madeline Kahn and Joanne Worley and Leslie Uggams and Randy Graff and a lot of wonderful, wonderful people. So I had a knack to do that. And I liked doing it, but I liked performing. And so after I had done Hello, Dolly, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, congratulations on Dolly. So now you're not acting anymore. You're just directing and choreographing, right?" And I panicked and I said, no. I like to perform. I like to perform. And so I didn't really do it much after that. And also when you direct and choreograph to make a living, it's easier as an actor. But when you direct and choreograph, if the show isn't any good, you have to take a lot of the credit for not being any good. And whereas an actor, they don't blame you, they blame the creators. But when you're the director, they kind of blame you. So if you don't choose the right thing to do when you get bad reviews, maybe people won't want to hire you. So I was afraid of that dilemma of being in. And also I like to work. And so, if you can't always direct and choreograph just the things you want to do, you have to work and you have to make money. So, it's a hard nut to crack. And so that's why, and I should have done more of it and I didn't. And I can still do it now, but there are so many people ahead of me who have the credentials and the credit and younger people. So I would not be as much in demand. And you just have to accept.
Hopefully you'll do something for us as a director.
I'd love to.
At the York Theater. Now, we just got a question from one of our audience members, William Hine. How was it playing Dolly Levi in a production of Hello, Dolly?
Well, it's funny how it happened. It's not that I like to get dressed up and drag because it's a lot of work. I know when I did La Cage aux Folles, I left 42nd Street to do La Cage. I was supposed to have been the last Zaza on Broadway. And they were closing the Palace Theater because they were moving, because they were redoing, they were building the hotel above it and all of that. And so we were going to go to the Mark Hellinger. And I was going to open the show at the Mark Hellinger with a lot of publicity. And of course, with the stock market almost crashing and the AIDS epidemic and all of that was going on, and the cost of transferring the show, they decided not to transfer. So there I was in rehearsal for a week. And then they posted the closing notice and I never got on. I was going to do like the last week at the Palace and then open it at the Mark Hellinger. But I got to do a lot of productions of La Cage aux Folles all over. So when I was doing La Cage down at the Wick Theater in Boca Raton, Florida. And Marilyn Wick, because we were a big hit with Lacage there. And Marilyn said, I want you to come back next year and do something else. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do Hello, Dolly. She said, no, I don't want you to direct and choreograph. I want you to be in the show. I said, well, I'll play Dolly because I've always wanted to. So she laughed. She thought I was joking. I said, no, I'm dead serious. I said, I've always wanted to play it. And there's another female role I always wanted to play, and that was Rose in Gypsy. Because the thing about these two women is that they're aggressive, masculine ladies who take charge. And I think a man can do that. And it's not that I like getting dressed up in drag. It's too much work, all that stuff and the things you wear. But, but I like playing a good part. And Dolly and Rose are two of the best parts that anybody can play in musical theater. So I would have done either one of those parts. As a matter of fact, I called Arthur Lawrence once because I had done a little show with Arthur. And I said, Arthur, if I can get someone who will let me do Gypsy and play Rose, will you give me the rights? And he took a beat and he said, yes, if it's you, I'll do it because I know you won't camp it up. I said, no, I won't. He said, yes. He said, we may have trouble with Steve, but he said, you leave him to me. But if you get someone who'll let you do it, and of course, the thing with doing Dolly, I didn't have a problem because of Jerry. And of course, Mike Stewart, who was half right in, but his sister had the rights, Francine Pascal.
Yeah.
Francine would have given me the rights, and that's why we did it. And
well, now, was that the first time? Was that the first time a male Dolly ever happened, and the only time
in America? In America, Actors Equity. I'm sure a lot of people did Dolly on the side, but under Actors Equity, it's the first time. And of course, then the wonderful guy in London did it over there, Danny LaRue.
Danny LaRue, yeah.
He did it over there. It wasn't a success there, though. But when I saw the show, I realized what it is. He characterized the part rather than just playing it. And of course, when I went down at the Wick, Louis Stadlin, who's one of my bosom buddies, came along to play Horace Van de Gelder. And Susan Powell, who's another bosom buddy, played Irene Malloy. And Jim Clow, who's another bosom buddy, played Cornelius. So I had all my buddies down there with me. And it was interesting because Louis said, Lee Roy, he said, the strangest thing, he said, when you got all done up and you came out, he said, it wasn't you as Dolly, it was Dolly Levi. He said, I never thought, Leroy. He said, you just became Dolly because I didn't, camp it up or characterize. I just played it as the part.
As the person.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of all these bosom buddies, would you ever be interested in playing Mame, or were you ever interested in playing Mame?
No, I wouldn't want to play Mame. She really requires a woman. It really requires a lady because she's, with a nephew and all of that. And it's not that kind of character that would adapt to a man. I think you have to be a woman to play Mame. I'm sure there are a lot of guys who would like to do it. And I know that back in the day, Charles Pierce, just the best at what he did, wanted to do Applause, and they wouldn't give him the rights.
Oh, really?
We were on tour with Applause. Comden and Green came out to San Francisco, and I took them to see Charles Pierce. And so I said, well, Charles, let me call Betty and Adolph and see what I can do. And I called Betty and Adolph, and I said, my friend Charles Pierce, I took you to see him. They said, oh, yes, he's wonderful. I said, well, he wants to do Applause in San Francisco, but they won't give him the rights. And they said, we'll give him the rights. And that's how he got to do it. And he sent me a tape of it, not a video, but an audio tape of it. And I'm being very honest now because I loved him. It was one of his big. It really wasn't very good because he caricaturized it. He just didn't play it straight. And he would do like little Betty Davis things, and you can't do that. You have to play it serious, and that's the only way for my taste.
Yeah.
That's why when Brian Bedford did, the importance of being earnest and all that stuff, he played it for real. So if you're going to get dressed up, that's what you have to do. You just have to become the character.
Yeah. Well, now I hate to.
But I'll tell you one part I'd play. I would play the mother. I would play the mother in Bye Bye Birdie. I would do that. So this is Rose Alvarez, pretty little Rose Alvarez. Rose, what happened? You had a sudden shock or something. I could play that.
That's great. That's great. We'll be looking forward to that. Now, I hate to be looking at the clock, but we're at the time where we said we would stop talking. But I hate to have missed all the stories that are still out there or in your.
We didn't get on the producers and all that, but we'll do it again, Jim.
I look forward to doing it again. But can you tell a quick story that comes to you from the producers, from your experience in the producers?
Well, it's again my audition stories. Because, I worked with Anne Bancroft, and I knew Anne Bancroft. I did her first special. If you go on YouTube, Change Partners and Dance, Anne Bancroft, I'm the first guy who dances with her in that number. So I knew her, and I have to tell you the whole backstory. And Glenn Kelly, who helped Mel with writing the score, is a buddy. And so when I went to see the show, we went next door to Angus's afterward, and Anne and Mel came in, and also Tom Meehan and Carolyn came in, and they sat at the table next to us. And I just loved the show. And it was in preview. They were opening like that following Sunday or Monday, and I think I was there on a Friday or Saturday. And I said, I know we're not supposed to say this because it may jinx you, but I'm so secure about this. You're going to win every Tony Award because this show is so brilliant. I said, and of course, Anne laughed. She said, honey, what part do you want to play? And I said, I want to play Ula. And we all laughed. And of course, then I got my audition for the role, of course, of Roger Debris. I mean, it was kind of an obvious, because I replaced Gary in Beauty and the Beast, by the way.
Really?
So, yeah. And so I got a call from my agent saying I had an audition for the touring company. And he said, now, Leroy, don't go in there and carry on like you do. You have to do exactly what they want you to do. They want you to come in and do High on Myself and learn it. Pick up the music. This was on a Thursday, and my audition was on a Saturday. So I thought, Jesus, here I am having to memorize this song. I saw the show once, but I didn't know it, and I'm going to have to learn this song and perform it. And Gary Beach got a Tony Award, and I'm going to compete with that by trying to do this number that I don't know, and I'm going to try to learn it in a day. I mean, come on, give me a break. So I went to the audition. And I said, and I walked in, and of course, Mel was at the audition, which I didn't know he was going to be there. And of course, the casting directors were there, and Susan Stroman, of course. So I said, look, I've got the sheet music. I can read this for you, and I can sing it. I didn't have time to learn it, and I feel inadequate trying to remember it and performing in front of you because you know it so much better than I do. But I've decided to do a song in the style of this, if you don't mind. And then if you don't like me, you can get rid of me. You don't have to hear me do this song. So I said, do you mind? And Mel said, just do what you want to do. I said, okay. So I went back and I said, I had a dream about you. Adolf! It's gonna come true. Adolf! Well, Mel let out a scream, and I pranced around and said, you'll be still going to have the whole world on a plate. I stick out my ass and wiggle and carry on. Mel loved it, and that was it. Now, the casting directors were not happy. They were there. And dear Susan, I don't know whether she had a chance because Mel laughed, and that was it. So I got the part.
That's great. I'm afraid we need to end on that wonderful story. I look forward to doing an evening part 2 with Lee Roy Reams.
And then we'll also show clips. We'll get that all
fixed out. Yeah, we'll make that happen the next time. I'm sorry, we had more technical glitches tonight than we've ever had. I don't know.
Listen, the audience is there, Jim. They love the York Theater. We've got to get behind the York and bring it back. And, all of you people who are supporters, continue to support. Let's make things happen. Let's bring back our little jewel so we can all get on stage. And I'll talk anytime you want. And we'll even do evenings in the theater with guest stars, and we'll chat. If you like this format, we'll make some events out of it. How about that?
That would be absolutely incredible. And to take nothing away from you, there have been all sorts of people who have said that since we've had this flood issue, which happened just 2.5 weeks ago. And we have now moved out of the theater. I don't know if everyone knows that. We have moved out so they can begin rebuilding the space. It's after 30 years of being in that space to be essentially homeless right now is very strange, because all through the pandemic, my feeling was, well, at least we've got the theater there. As soon as it opens up again, we can go back and do what we do. But now it's not there. So we need, as you said, we need everyone's help to get back to where we want to be. And in fact, there's a number that you can text to donate if you care to do so. So many people have donated already, and we are extremely grateful to them. But anything you can do is very helpful and very essential at this point. We appreciate it. And most of all, Leroy, we appreciate you. We love you. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Me too. Till next time.
Till next time. Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.
Bye-bye.